To say that Hitsugaya had a difficult time during Bleach's final arc would be a massive understatement, and to be fair, it wasn't a cakewalk for any of the other Shinigami either, but Hitsugaya is definitely a top contender for playing on veteran difficulty during the 1000-Year Blood War arc, because when you combine an arc that takes no prisoners and a fan favorite character who has more screen time, it results in a very extensive compilation of L's that we have never before seen in the series. Now while this video won't be a total encapsulation of all of Hitsugaya's losses and his struggles within the 1000-Year Blood War arc, I do intend to go over one of, if not his toughest encounters during this arc. It was one that would lead to him being taken off of the board for a good part of the story. So with all of this context, it's time for me to deep dive into Toshiro Hitsugaya's battle against Bazz B and Cang. Before the video begins, only 12% of the people who watch my content are subscribed to the channel. If you enjoy these videos, then subscribe and stick around for more content just like this. Now let's get back to the topic of the video. The first invasion of the Quincy had hit the Soul Society incredibly hard. After all, they were caught off guard by an incredibly powerful enemy, who even under normal circumstances would have given them a tough time. But what had made it so much more difficult for the Shinigami was that the Quincy were preparing and studying them for over 1000 years, analysing all of their weaknesses. It of course had resulted in a total one-sided slaughter. During this first invasion, which begins in chapter 494, Yhwach invades the Soul Society with his army of sternritter in an attempt to destroy the Soul Society, but thankfully the Gote 13 had risen to protect it, dispatching several captains in order to face off against the Quincy and to prevent the slaughter of its members. Hitsugaya, being among these captains, would go on to face Cang, who has been bestowed with the letter I as his shrift, standing for the Iron. This is another really cool character whose full power that we don't really get to see, but he does have an incredibly cool claw, which reminds me of Vega from Street Fighter. When it comes to the manga, we didn't get to see much of this fight, but the anime does thankfully extend their brief exchange, where Cang shatters an ice wall that was created by Hitsugaya, after which Hitsugaya tries to cut him with his Zanpakuto and ends up failing. The captain of the 10th division is left to ponder why he was unable to pierce him. Cang kicks him away and he realizes that his arm is frozen, after which he uses his frozen arm empowered by his shrift to ram it into Hitsugaya, sending him crushing into a nearby building. I'm so glad that this battle was extended within the anime, and it genuinely makes me feel excited thinking about what they'll do with their next and final fight. Hitsugaya's Bankai, along with those of Komamura, Soifon and Byakuya, would all get stolen by the sternritter that they had respectively faced, and we wouldn't see Hitsugaya again until Yamamoto activates Zankai no Tachi, which renders Hitsugaya's stolen Bankai Daiguren Hyorenmaru unusable for Cang, because of the intense heat that had melted his ice. And this is pretty much everything that we know about Hitsugaya's first battle against Cang. Now the main takeaway of this first fight between them is that Hitsugaya had lost his Bankai, and this was quite a considerable loss to him because he was so reliant upon his Bankai, with the only real difference between his Shikai and Bankai was the actual volume of ice that they can produce. This would mean that unlike Soifon, Komamura and Byakuya, who could function decently with just their Shikai, Hitsugaya was essentially powerless without his Bankai. Due to his Shikai's ice being far thinner and overall weaker, his entire moveset was pretty much rendered useless due to most of his abilities relying on this great amount of ice that is produced by his Bankai, as well as on his ability to encase his opponents, which he will be unable to do with his Shikai alone. Hitsugaya recognizes this fact immediately, and so he decides to invest his time in bettering his swordsmanship and learning to fight with less ice instead. Unfortunately, the second invasion will not give him the chance to show off his new Zanjutsu techniques at all, at least not in the way that he had hoped, as we see a lot of his swordsmanship demonstrated when zombie Hitsugaya destroys Mayuri, Yumichika and Ikaku with just his sword skills for the most part. The second invasion of the Quincy had begun in chapter 547 of the manga, and with the return of the Quincy came the terrifying reveal that they have been living within the shadows of the Soul Society for over 1000 years, as the entire Serite is transformed into the Vandenreich city. The Shinigami no longer had the home advantage and they were left feeling confused and disorientated. The Quincy were well aware of this and they had capitalized on it immediately, dispatching themselves all across the entire Soul Society, taking advantage of the confusion that they have just caused. A group of Shinigami would attack sternritter H Bazz B in an attempt to kill him. They had thought that they were keeping the enemy out as they were struggling to come to terms with the fact that the Quincy are already within their barrier. The Shinigami were incinerated by Bazz B's flames, as the sternritter would then state that the situation had long evolved past last discussions of keeping them out or letting them through, because their invasion was now totally complete. The group of Shinigami is revealed to have been saved by a wall of ice that was formed between them and Bazz B's flames. Rangiku and Hitsugaya make their entrance during the second invasion of the Quincy. Hitsugaya agrees that they may now no longer have to defend their territory from the Quincy since they have already breached the barriers. He does state that Bazz B's flames are not going to get past him. Just as their fight is about to begin, the sternritter remembers that Hitsugaya is the little ice captain who had his Bankai stolen by Kangdu. They both formally introduce themselves to each other as Bazz B notes that their elements, being fire and ice respectively, are a great match for each other. They both end up clashing, creating a massive explosion which reverberates as shockwaves that blow away all of the ice walls that Hitsugaya had created before their fight had started. Rangiku immediately flash steps to the Shinigami behind the now collapsed ice wall as she orders them to retreat. The Shinigami do leave, but not before one of them notices that the ice that had just saved them was so thin that it's a miracle that it held together in the first place. The Shinigami then wonder whether if Hitsugaya is going to be okay against the sternritter. Hitsugaya and Bazz B begin to fight, but with each clash it confirms the suspicions of the Shinigami. Hitsugaya's now extremely thin ice was no match for Bazz B's flames. Even Bazz B himself notices that Hitsugaya's ice is far too thin and tells him that as long as his flames continue to raise the humidity in the area, Hitsugaya's ice wall will be made even more ineffective. Rangiku returns to her captain, telling him that the Shinigami have safely escaped, as she surprisingly tells him to begin their plan. She releases her Zanpakuto Hinako, and Hitsugaya simultaneously creates multiple walls of ice. Under the impression of it being the same weak ice that he had casually melted before, Bazz B would shoot his flames at it only to find out that the ice doesn't melt. Hitsugaya explains that by taking advantage of the slight difference that exists between his Shikai and Bankai, he's been able to adapt in order to fight with less ice. He reveals by merging his ice with the ash of Hinako, he's been able to create a multi-layered vacuum of ice, and while it's far from being optimal, it's still enough ice to stop the flames of the Quincy. Bazz B furiously begins to blast the wall of ice with his flames, but to no avail, and with a final confirmation of the fact that Bazz B's flames can't pierce his wall of ice, Hitsugaya strikes him with an ability called Vacuum Ice Blade, as it appears to have killed the Quincy, with the spectating Shinigami now celebrating. Hitsugaya and Rangiku sense the spiritual pressure of Soifon while she is battling BG9 and consider going to help her with a fight, but as they turn to walk away, the supposedly dead Bazz B calls to them and asks them if they're really going to leave when the fight has only just begun. The ice that had appeared to nail Bazz B to the wall has melted away effortlessly. The unharmed sternritter walks towards them menacingly as he draws the attention of the other Shinigami, who I'm pretty certain was supposed to have retreated a long time ago, but I guess Kubo had made them stick around for the purposes of commentary, which I'm sure is more of a higher priority than them remaining alive. After the sternritter removes his tattered cloak, it demonstrates that he is completely unscathed underneath. Bazz B questions whether if Hitsugaya actually believed that he had the power to stop his flames, because the only reason that Asnot, Nanana and himself are alive after being blasted by Yamamoto's flames was because of the fact that he was able to cancel out the head captain's flames with his own. Bazz B then completely melts what is left of the ice that had originally pinned him to the wall, stating that he wished that Hitsugaya still had his Bankai to prove that all that he had needed was one finger to defeat him. In defense, the captain fires a torrent of ice that never reaches Bazz B because of the sheer heat of his spiritual pressure, which melts it before it even makes contact with him. Realizing the hopelessness of the situation, Hitsugaya orders Rangiku to retreat. He uses his ability Ice Wall in order to cover her escape and to delay Bazz B. His efforts prove to be futile after Bazz B uses Burner Finger 1 in order to pierce through the ice wall as well as Hitsugaya's chest. The battle continues in chapter 551, where a now severely wounded Hitsugaya attempts to escape, but Bazz B relentlessly pursues him. The captain creates a massive wall of ice in an attempt to seal him off, but it is easily melted by Bazz B with a single finger. But Hitsugaya was relying on Bazz B to melt his ice, as he uses his ice to form a wall of mist around Bazz B. This proves to be a slight inconvenience for the Quincy, who uses his burning stomp to create a mass of flames that blows away the mist, revealing Hitsugaya, who only moments ago was trying his best to run away, as he is now just standing there. It leaves Bazz B wondering why he hadn't taken advantage of the mist to find somewhere to hide. Hitsugaya responds that he didn't have the time to hide, but he did have enough time to set up a trap, revealing Bazz B was standing in the center of a now forming hexagonal ice formation. Before Bazz B has a chance to figure out what on earth is happening, Hitsugaya Hitsugaya activates this ability. It's a technique called 6-point ice formation, as it completely encases the target in ice. The captain's efforts would once again prove to be futile, as his ability begins to fall apart due to the incredible heat of Bazz B's flames, with Hitsugaya's ice just proving to be a minor inconvenience to the Quincy at this point. In all honesty, I felt like Kubo could have rewarded Hitsugaya a bit more for his resourcefulness here, but unfortunately that did not happen, because his struggling convinces Bazz B to upgrade his burner finger, as he uses burner finger 2. After he destroys Hitsugaya's trap, Bazz B would use burner finger 2 on the surprised Hitsugaya, and this creates a massive explosion. When the dust settles, we get to see an even more wounded Hitsugaya, whose Zanpakuto has also been shattered by the attack. He collapses onto the floor as it appears as though these are his final moments. The fight continues in chapter 552 as Bazz B approaches him to finish him off, but he ends up being interrupted by Kangdu, who insists that he will be the one to finish off Hitsugaya because Yhwach had ordered the sternritters to kill the captains who they had stolen their Bankai from. To be honest, it is a pretty twisted request from the leader of the Quincy, who orders his men to kill the captains with their own power. It's a pretty sadistic order, and I'm glad that none of the sternritters actually had followed through with this, because it's at this very moment that Urahara announces that he's figured out a way to restore the stolen Bankai to their rightful users. This is before Kangdu arrives and drops the lifeless body of Rangiku next to Hitsugaya, stating that it's only fair if Hitsugaya dies along with his precious lieutenant. The sternritter believes that all things that live together should die together, but Hitsugaya's Bankai is one that will continue to live on after the captain is dead. The sternritter tells him that he's deeply sorry for this, and this is a very interesting way of looking at things, and I wish that Kubo had kept Kangdu around for a bit longer, as he was a very fascinating character. Continuing in chapter 533, right before he finishes him off, the story cuts off to Urahara and Mayuri explaining how they have found a way to use the antagonistic relationship between Quincy and Holo Reiatsu in order to restore the stolen Bankai. Urahara's new creation, these shadow infiltrating pills, allow the Shinigami to temporarily holofy the stolen Bankai, which of course are still bound to the souls of their original owners. And we know that holos are poisonous to Quincy, so it makes their Bankai poisonous to them, as the sternritter's body rejects the Bankai that they have stolen, returning it to their respectful owners. These pills that Urahara creates are teleported to all of the captains, including those who haven't had their Bankai stolen, as a sort of precaution so they don't have to worry about ever losing it. When Hitsugaya touches his respective pill, it takes immediate effect, as a massive amount of blood gushes out of Kangdu's back, with one of the wings of Daiguren Hyorinmaru falling off as well. The sternritter turns to see Hitsugaya rising, as he possesses the wing that he has just lost. He asks why the Bankai is returning to him, as he detects that there's nothing wrong with the Bankai stealing medallion, but Hitsugaya states that it's most likely because Hyorinmaru wants to return home. This cocky statement annoys Kangdu, because he doesn't accept this idea that Bankai are sentient, as he reveals that the sternritters had in fact trained to control the Bankai that they had stolen. He shoots a massive wave of ice at Hitsugaya only for it to stop right at the moment of impact, as the captain reveals that Hyorinmaru cannot attack itself, so using his own Bankai against him won't work. This annoys Kangdu even more as he resorts to using his martial arts, which also fails as the ice on Hitsugaya's body reflexively extends itself to block any incoming attack. Kangdu breaks Hitsugaya's ice with a flurry of kicks and kicks him into the air. He once again tells him that he'd appreciate if he'd stop talking about the Bankai as though it were a sentient being. While hurtling through the air due to the force of the sternritter's kick, he asks him whether if he truly believes that Bankai aren't sentient, to which Hyorinmaru responds to him in agreement. We are then shown Hitsugaya's Bankai in all of its glory fully restored, but it appears as though half of his face is covered by a hollow-like mask. He welcomes Hyorinmaru back and it looks absolutely incredible in its holified form. And this is great to see considering how upset Hitsugaya was after he couldn't hear the voice of his Bankai, so it's definitely very relieving to see both of them together again. Kangdu notices that he's completely lost Hitsugaya's Bankai and he resorts to using his own power, as he charges up a technique he calls Snake Claw. He aims this at Hitsugaya, but it's a second too late, as the sternritter is frozen in a massive cross-shaped ice formation before he's able to release his attack. Finally, Hitsugaya was able to defeat his opponent. Bazz B watches all of this unfold and mocks Kangdu for acting all cool, only to then get washed up by Hitsugaya. After defeating Kangdu, he lands on a nearby building as his Bankai begins to deactivate on his own. And if you recall, this is a telling sign that a user is near death. He tries to reach out to the unconscious Rangiku only to collapse on the floor himself, and we don't really see Hitsugaya again for quite some time. This was a very fascinating fight to watch unfold, and I would have preferred if Kangdu got a bit more of a chance to shine within the story, but I appreciate how Kubo had used him as an example by giving an extra layer of depth to the relationship that exists between a Zanpakuto and a Shinigami, as we actually got to see Hyorinmaru communicate with Hitsugaya, proving that a Zanpakuto and its Shikai and Bankai are sentient. Now this fight proves that the true power of a Bankai isn't in training to master and control its power. A Zanpakuto isn't just an inanimate tool like Kangdu had assumed. A proper communication needs to exist between a Shinigami and its Zanpakuto, and his failure to grasp this fact had led to Kangdu's defeat. What were your thoughts about Hitsugaya battling Bazz B and then Kangdu? Did you enjoy both of these fights? I'd love to know all of your thoughts on this battle that redeems the character of Hitsugaya. After suffering so many L's, he finally has his time to shine. Also, do you expect this battle to be expanded upon during Core 2 of the 1000 Year Blood War arc? Continue the discussion by letting me know what changes or expansions you want to see on either of these battles. Lastly, thank you for making it to the end of this video, and I can't wait to see you in my next Bleach Explained video. If you enjoy my content, then you can support my channel through Patreon for as little as $1 a month, or even through YouTube by becoming a channel member. You will gain access to exclusive channel perks and a Discord server which I frequently use. So become a member of my Zero Division and be the first to know about my upcoming videos. And once again, thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.